So just as we did in the first part of letter E, we're going to do the same process in part 2 of letter E to find the 8th term. Remember how in part 1 we found the 6th term? We even got to the point where we realized that by doing all this math, the 6th term was really just plugging 6 in for the n. We're going to do the exact same thing to find the 8th term, which means we're going to plug in n as 8. And that just means we're going to use the same formula that they gave us, and we're going to plug in n is 8, because the 8th term is what we plug, or the 8 is what we plug in when we want to find the 8th term. So just to make sure, we're plugging in 8 to find the 8th term. That means we're going to take that same formula, and everywhere we see an n, we're going to replace it with an 8. So t of 8 equals, so notice I'm plugging in the 8 instead of n, t of, instead of n, 8 minus 1, plus t of, instead of n, 8 minus 2. So same thing that I did before. I'm going to look at this, I'm going to clean it up a little bit, because 8 minus 1, that seems kind of silly. 8 minus 1 is just 7. So t of 8 minus 1 is 7, plus t of 8 minus 2 is just 6, so I'll simplify that. Now remember how we said t of 8 means 8th term? I'm going to write that just so I keep it straight. T of 7 then, well, that must mean 7th term. And t of 6, well, that must mean 6th term. So let's think about this formula logically. It says that the 8th term is equal to the 7th term plus the 6th term. Well, I know those things because those came from the table. If the 8th term, so I'll still call it t of 8, but I'm going to really say it as the 8th term. If the 8th term is just the 7th term plus the 6th term, I'm going to go back and look at my table. The 7th term was 13, and the 6th term was 8. So I'm going to plug into my formula where it said 7th term, that was 13, plus where it says 6th term, I'll plug in the 6th term, which was 8, and if I look at it logically, t of 8, the 8th term, would be 13 plus 8, which is 21. And now I'm going to look back at my table. Yep, the 8th term was 21. We already had that. We did that work. So funny enough, the formula did confirm what we already know a second time. It worked in the first part, and now it worked again in the second part. The formula really is giving us the numbers that we know in the sequence. The key is to recognize how to translate the formula into something practical. T of 8 isn't very helpful for us to think about until we translate it to the phrase 8th term. T of 7, 7th term. T of 6, 6th term. So once you think about it in those words instead of in terms of formulas, it might help. So let's think logically. In the third part it says, if you wanted to know the 10th term in the sequence, what other terms would you want to, or would you need to know? So let's think about this. Let's game plan. If n is 10, then again I'd plug 10 into all these other spaces. T of 10 equals, going back to my formula, T of 10 minus 1 plus T of 10 minus 2. So if I clean this up a little bit, I would say to myself, okay, T of 10 equals T of 10 plus, or 10 minus 1 is 9, so I'd write 9, plus T of 10 minus 2 is 8, so I'd write 8 there. So to find the 10th term, and again, I'll translate this into words, to find the 10th term, we need to take T of 9, the 9th term, plus T of 8, the 8th term. So to answer this question, it looks like if I want to know the 10th term, I need to know the 9th and the 8th terms. And if I go back to my table, I will ask myself, do I have that information? If I go back, yep, sure enough, I do. The 9th term is 34, and the 8th term is 21. So it looks like I can find the 10th term in the sequence by doing the 9th plus the 8th. I do 34 plus 21, that's 55, and that is indeed the 10th term. So hopefully by now you can start to see that the Fibonacci sequence really works two ways. We can use the pattern in the table, and we can use this equation. This equation, called the recursive definition, is something that we're going to start to see a lot. So the rest of the questions on this page are meant to get you more comfortable with a recursive style equation and this T of n thing in particular. So the rest of the questions are basically going to ask you to start thinking about this formula. You don't have to know the Fibonacci sequence specifically, you just have to be able to adapt to new formulas. So as long as this idea makes sense, take some time to chew on it, and then be ready to move on to question number 2, where we're going to practice a little bit more with this new style of formula.